Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Make Me Want to Love You by N.D. Jackson. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Shayna woke up and spent the first few minutes of her day staring at the ceiling fan that was in desperate need of dusting as she went through the mental checklist for the day ahead. As a single mom, she had to organize her tasks to make sure everything got done, but the truth was she'd been doing it long before she sent her abusive ex packing. JT wasn't much of a helper, and she'd done all the heavy lifting over the years, holding a job while making sure the kids got to doctor's appointments and after-school activities, homework, and everything in between. Now, though, she was well and truly on her own. Everything from home repairs to meals and bills fell completely on her shoulders. Okay, time to get my day going. She sat up and let out a heavy sigh as she looked around the room, which was so different now than it used to be. There was no discarded signs of a male presence. No traces of JT remained. The nightstand on the other side of the bed no longer held a man's watch, old car magazines, or the ever-present can of beer. It was empty. Her clothes now took up the entire closet. Only recently has she even started sleeping in the middle of the bed. Okay, she grunted and sat up before she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood before she padded to the bathroom that was now all hers. Shayna jumped in the shower. The metal shower rack that only held her yummy-smelling body washes, scrubs, and care products made her smile. The hot water felt heavenly on her skin, and Shayna smiled to herself, proud that she'd called the repairman and had gotten the water tank fixed without anyone's help. She rushed through the shower, knowing that Zoe and Eli would be awake soon, which meant she needed to get breakfast started to cut off any requests for sugary cereal or waffles. Her little boy loved waffles and pancakes and anything else that resembled the two, and he wasn't afraid to ask for it. While her daughter, Zoe, was happy to eat just about anything as long as it was wrapped between two pieces of bread. Every single day. On her way down to the kitchen, she picked up toys and clothes that had been discarded by her kids the day before and dropped them all into a big plastic bin she would make them dig through later to put it all away. A quick scan of the living room told her the place was mostly clean, and she sighed with relief before she made her way to the kitchen. Her go-to breakfast these days was scrambled eggs with veggies because both kids ate it without complaint, and they all started the day with something sort of healthy. She opened the fridge, found what she needed, and pulled out the ingredients just as her phone buzzed and skidded across the countertop. Shayna's coppery brows furrowed at the early morning call, knowing it had to be bad news, so with a deep inhale, she let it out slowly and answered the call. Hello? Shayna. Kira yawned through the rest of the sentence and then laughed. Sorry, late night. What's up? Her belly clenched. Why would her boss be calling so early? It had to be bad news. It had to be, right? Is there any way you can open the shop today? I was up late working on some inventory and haven't been to sleep yet. I'll finish the dresses, get a few hours of sleep, and then finish the day at the shop. All the words rushed out of Kira, and the sentence was punctuated with another yawn. Sorry, can you do it? If not, I totally understand. Shayna smiled. Kira was new to being a boss and a designer, and she was entirely too nice. It was something they'd have to talk about later. For now, she needed to think about the logistics of going in earlier than planned while the kids were still asleep, and breakfast hadn't been started yet. But I need this job to work out, and that means Kira needs more clothes to sell. That was the deciding factor. She liked this job, like that she no longer worked under the watchful eye of her former in-laws. Sure, I'll be there to open, no problem. Oh, thank you, Shayna. You are a lifesaver. She smiled again. It's no different than when you give me time off to go to the kids' games and other activities. I'm happy to help. Get back to it while I make some calls. Shayna ended the call and let out a long, contemplative breath. Her parents were out of town. Again, enjoying retirement now that she had her life under control, which meant she couldn't call them. There was just one other person she trusted enough to come through for her in a pinch. Dre, I need you. As soon as her best friend picked up the phone, she gave a quick rundown of the situation in one long breath. Can you help? Of course, she grunted and ended the call. Shayna stared at the phone and then laughed. Dre was not a morning person. When she arrived, Shayna knew she would need coffee. Lots and lots of coffee. So she put on a pot and rushed upstairs to change from her leggings and t-shirt into work clothes. Kira wasn't a stickler for appropriate work attire, but Shayna tried to look professional and stylish as much as she could with her out-of-date wardrobe. Still, she managed to feel halfway pretty with her fitted jeans and a stylish pale green tunic that she'd found on clearance where she worked, pretty things, and used her employee discount. Paired with nude ballet flats and matching accessories, she was almost impressed with her appearance. Almost. No time to dawdle. She could admire her ensemble later, but now she needed to get breakfast started before Dre arrived. When Shayna came back down, the kids were already awake and had made their way to the kitchen. Morning, babies. Morning, Mom. Zoe groaned because, just like her Aunt Dre, she was not a morning person. Good morning, Mama. Her little boy Eli was very much a morning bird like her, and his bright smile was a welcome sight. I'm hungry. She laughed. Of course you are. Got to fill that wooden leg of yours for the day, don't we? Eli nodded, and his grin grew wider. Shayna cracked the eggs into a mixing bowl, added a pinch of salt and pepper just as the doorbell rang. She frowned and went to the door. Nerves pooled in her belly. Dre usually walked right in, and as far as she knew, JT was still locked up. It's just a knee-jerk reaction, she reminded herself. A gasp escaped when she looked through the peephole, and her gaze landed on that handsome, no, scratch that, gorgeous business partner of her best friend. His blue-gray eyes sparkled as if he could see through the door and read her mind. Burke, she frowned as she gazed up at his broad shoulders and smiling face. What are you doing here? Dre sent me, he said, the grin never leaving his face. She said you needed help, and she was on a call to Dubai she couldn't get off of, so I'm here instead. He stepped inside, brushing past Shayna as if he'd been to her home thousands of times. Despite being in town for months, he hadn't been there more than a handful of times, mostly because she reacted like a silly schoolgirl when he was around and tried to keep her distance. She stepped back, visibly affected by the 6 feet and some change of Greek god who'd strolled inside her place, and looked around with a smile. Sure, Burke, come on in. He chuckled, and the sound was smooth like honey and that expensive whiskey JT bought even though they couldn't afford it. Thanks. Nice place. Looks like those 90s sitcoms Dre loves to listen to as background noise when she works. Shayna laughed and shook her head. At first, she objected to someone knowing her best friend as well, maybe better, as she did, but Burke seemed like a good guy. Sure, he was entirely too good-looking, too charming, and he always smelled good, but he cared about Dre and was fiercely protective of her, which Shayna respected. Thanks, I think. Dre did tell you that I need someone to watch Eli and Zoe? Burke laughed again and shook his head, not at all offended by her skepticism. Anyone else would be, but she had to ask since he'd shown up in a 3-piece suit at 8 in the morning. That is not an answer. She folded her arms and waited for him to give her a real answer. She couldn't leave her kids with just anyone, and yeah, she knew Burke would keep them safe, but what did he actually know about kids? His beaming grin faded, and he crossed the living room so they were face to face, his expression serious as his hands dropped on her shoulders, big and warm and comforting. Struck momentarily speechless, she stared up at his perfectly mussed blonde hair, streaked by the sun, and the scruff on his chin, which was a few days past a clean shave. His lips tugged into a crooked smile as he squeezed her shoulders. Seriously, Shayna, I can handle them, no worries. No worries? I am a bundle of worries, she bit out and skirted around him to get to the kitchen. She reached for her phone and checked the time. She needed to be at the store in 30 minutes, so it was Burke, or she'd have to call Kira back and go back on her promise. Okay, this is their schedule for the day, she said and shoved her phone in his face. He glanced at the schedule and nodded. Easy peasy. Shayna glared at him and took her phone back, or tried to, but Burke had plucked it from her fingers. See, when you say stuff like that, you make it incredibly difficult to trust you. He laughed again. The rich, deep sound was one she could easily get used to. Don't worry, I just sent the schedule to my phone. I'm all caught up. She wasn't sure this was a good idea, but Shayna didn't have a lot of options. Eli ran up to Burke and tugged on his finger. Are you taking me to karate today? Burke smiled and ruffled Eli's hair before he consulted the schedule on Shayna's phone, which was still in his possession, and nodded. Yep, too bad I left my gi at home. Eli laughed at his joke. You're too big for my class. You would win every time. Burke frowned. Yeah, that sounds like something I'd like. Eli laughed again and turned to his mom. I'm still hungry, he pouted. Me too, Burke said. What's for breakfast? She narrowed her gaze and pointed to the counter. Scrambled eggs with veggies. Can you cook? I can cook eggs 12 ways, he answered proudly. Don't worry, little humans. I'll make sure you don't starve. He watched him for a long moment. He was confident and easygoing, but he had a way with the kids that made him trustworthy. Seemingly trustworthy, anyway. Are you sure? He nodded. I promise you that your kids will be safe with me. And we both know if I make a mistake, neither of them will hesitate to tell me. He winked, and Shayna felt all her breath leave her lungs. Why did he have to be both handsome and charming? Adding kindness into the mixture was just plain cruel. Oh, fine, she sighed and shook her head. Call me if you need anything or if you have any questions. His blonde brows wiggled. I already put your number into my phone since you refused to give it to me before. He winked again, and Shayna let out a squeak before she turned on her heels and left the kitchen. His deep laughter followed behind her. Crap, the kids! She went back, giving Eli and then Zoe a hug and a kiss. Be good for Burke. He's doing me a big favor today. We will, Zoe promised, and that was just what Shayna needed to hear. She hated that her 10-year-old was forced to be so mature at such an early age, but on days like this, she was also incredibly grateful. Bye, Mom. Eli stood on the chair and held his arms out for another hug. Have a good day, Mama. Thanks, Eli. She hugged her baby boy tight one final time before she made her way to the door. Don't touch the stove, she heard Burke say to the kids and smiled to herself. Shayna. He caught up to her at the front door, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. Dre's family to me, and these kids mean the world to her. I won't fuck it up. Her shoulders sagged and she nodded. I know. I'm just a nervous single mom. Right now, you're a working woman, so you'd better get to work. He turned her shoulders and shoved her out the door, patting her ass like a football coach before he closed the door in her face. Shayna wanted to be mad. She wanted to march back inside the house and tell him a thing or two about his behavior. She wanted to do all of that, but she couldn't because that one little smack on her ass was more action than she'd seen in a long time, and the blush that crept up her skin would give it away. Quickly. Okay, fine, I liked it, she admitted to herself, casting one last look at the door before she jumped in her car and went to open Pretty Things. Burke was right. She was also a working woman, and her children were in capable hands. Mostly. She hoped.